All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for watching. I know I've gotten some attention today, and I know a lot of people say, well, all attention is good attention, you know. But some people were upset at me, just like they were upset when I apologized to Matt Kelly for the debacle that happened when he was scheduled to go speak at the synagogue in Florida. I forget, it's at Boca Raton, or by Rabbi Goldberg invited him, and they made a big problem with it, and a lot of people were upset at him, and I think it was inappropriate the way that people handled it. And if you have a problem, you talk to Rabbi Goldberg, and Sof Kol Sof, he's the Mar Asra, and it's his decision who to invite to speak. And certainly nobody should have been harassing. Whether Rabbi Goldberg was right or wrong is really irrelevant, and I think as the Mar Asra of the synagogue, it's his right to invite whoever he wants, and I really don't think he was doing anything wrong there. Not any more than how in the Young Israel of Woodmere a few years ago they invited pastors to speak on issues about Israel. So here to invite particularly a Catholic missionary is not running after Jews. Yeah, he'd be happy if a Jew converts, but that's not his his focus. The Catholic missionaries are really focused on the lapsed Catholics. But he wasn't even coming to talk about religion. He was coming to talk about shalom bayis issues. And the Talmud does say that if someone tells you there's wisdom among the nations, you should believe it. And this was an issue of wisdom and not an issue of Torah. And yet still ignorant people felt that it was worthwhile to harass this innocent man who did nothing wrong. And it's not quite the same, I understand, but I felt that I wanted to write to Ben Garrison, who was a cartoonist who was invited to the White House, and whether he was disinvited or whether he chose not to go, I'm not sure exactly what happened. But people were upset about a cartoon that was commissioned by someone Chernovich, who's not Jewish, even though he has the name Chernovich. I think his name Mike Chernovich, who's a strange character. And this Garrison also seems to be somewhat of a strange character. But as I've made several videos on the subject, I've said before, and I'll say it again, I don't believe that criticism of Soros or the Rothschilds or whatever you want, or now with this Epstein guy, that is really anti-Semitic. And I think the best thing that the Jewish community can do is to distance themselves from these people and not really care so much whether they're Jewish or not. And I don't know if Epstein's Jewish. I don't know. There's nothing that I could find on the internet that spoke about who his parents were and whether his mother's Jewish or not. And when I say Jewish, I mean halachically Jewish. But he doesn't appear to be a pious person in any sense, not even by the conservative or even the reform, standards. And I don't mean just with this issue, with his, with what he's in trouble for, but in general, he doesn't appear to be, I don't know if he even goes to shul, to a Reform temple on Yom Kippur, Reform or conservative, whatever. I don't know, all right, if he goes to federal prison, maybe a Kenshiva teen, sure, he could repent if he's Jewish or whatever, and if he's not, he could also repent. We'll say, and hopefully he gets the help he needs. And I'm all for that. But there were issues that came up on the internet that I saw on Twitter and other places that I do believe were Judeo-phobic in reference to him, to this Epstein. And they were, kind of hinting that, this has something to do with the Jewish religion. And when it comes to things like that, those are things that we have to fight against. And the answer we have to give is, this guy's not religious. And no, nothing he is doing is in any way condoned by the Jewish religion. A lot of people misinterpreted passages in our holy books, interpreted them in ways that are totally out of context and wrong. And these things have been refuted, and I've spoken of them. And these are the issues that we really have to focus on. And the fact of the matter is it possible that there are people who try to justify evil actions based on these things? It's possible that such people could exist. Doesn't mean that they're right. But I certainly don't believe that this Epstein guy, he is influenced somehow, that he saw something in the Gemara in the Talmud and said that that therefore he learned something out from there. No. There's no reason to even think such a thing, because he's not a religious person. Not a religious Jew. I don't know what religion he practices, if he practices any religion. And another problem that we do have in the Jewish world is that there were cults that existed that believed that one should commit sins, and that this was somehow going to, it was involved in some kind of eschatological work, and that they believed that this would fix the world, and based on misinterpretations of Kabbalistic texts, not really Talmudic texts. And we kind of touched on that briefly in the previous video. Historically speaking, there were these two groups, the Sabbateans and later the Frankists, who engaged in evil behavior, sinful behavior, and believed that somehow this was going to fix the world and bring the Messianic age. And these were cults, and these were very dangerous cults. And even, I think it's before Frank's time, but after Shabtai Tzvi's time, there's a very famous letter that Rav Yaakov Emden wrote. And Rav Yaakov Emden was very strong fighting against the Sabbatean movement. And he wrote to the Christian community, don't be influenced by the Sabbateans, don't follow them. He actually wrote to them, it's better that they should follow their Messiah, Jesus. And shockingly, Rabbi Yaakov Emden wrote that Christianity, Jesus, and the church have spread Torah more than any other institution in the world. Now, obviously, he's not teaching that it's a pure Torah. Certainly not what the church is teaching is a pure Torah. But what he means there is that to remove the Gentile world from heathen practices and bring them to an idea of ethical monotheism, this has been a positive development for the world. I believe that's what he's saying there. And as I've seen, working with different religions, even the pagan heathen religions have been influenced by Christianity to be more moral and ethical from a Torah standpoint than they were previously, and even theologically. I mean, one of the volunteers who come to my prison is a Wiccan minister, and he told me he believes that the divine is only one, but that it manifests itself in different ways in different cultures and so forth. And so he has devotion to gods and goddesses and so forth that are manifestations of the one. And so too in Hinduism, you have a teaching like that. And it depends on which school of Hinduism, because there are many, many schools of Hinduism. And there are many Hindus that believe there's only one God, and that these different gods that are discussed in Hinduism are just manifestations of the one, or that they are lower than the ultimate one. There are some Hindus actually who are atheists in their theology and believe that all the stories of their gods are all metaphors. And even putting aside the theological aspects, there's a story that I remember hearing about a British general, I believe, who told a Hindu priest that we will respect the Hindu tradition of burning widows, but that they Hindus should respect the British tradition of hanging men who kill innocent widows. And that's when pretty much the widow burning came to an end in India. Meaning that, which certainly, from a Torah perspective, that's a positive thing, that they no longer are murdering innocent women just because their husband happened to die. And these ideas of basic human rights are Torah ideas. They did not exist in all of the ancient Greek and ancient Roman societies that so much of Western society is built on. You know, as Ben Shapiro says, you know, the Western culture was built on Jerusalem and Athens, and if you didn't have Jerusalem, Athens would not have been worth it. You needed Jerusalem to make whatever we got from Athens to be worthwhile. And the balance of the two. And with that being said, I strongly believe that this insistence on having this knee-jerk reaction to any time a Jewish person or a person of Jewish ancestry is criticized, and to call that anti-Semitic, frankly, is it's primitive. It's anachronistic. It has no place in the 21st century. It's racist, even if you want to call it reverse racism. Not every criticism of someone who claims a Jewish identity is quote-unquote anti-Semitic. And as I said, and I was quoted, and I stand by it, I do not believe in the concept of anti-Semitism nor of Semitism. These are Nazi concepts. I know they predate the Nazis, but not by very much. They come from secular racialist German philosophy to redefine the Jewish community from being a community of faith, which it always was, and a community of faith that anyone from any race can join. And the rabbis went out of their way to de-racialize the Jewish community. Meaning the Torah tells us the Ammonite and the Moabite cannot come into the congregation of the Lord. The tradition tells us that means they can convert, but they can't marry somebody who is of a legitimate Jewish stock. They can only marry other people who could not come into the congregation of the Lord. For example, the mamzer, who is of illegitimate stock. However, we know, first of all, that Ruth, the great-grandmother of King David, was a Moabite. The rabbis teach she was a Moabite princess. And Ruth, how did they justify David? The answer was, that the Talmud gives, is that the prohibition against the Moabite and the Ammonite only applies to the men, because the men did not bring them food and water, and the women were not expected to be hospitable to men, even though the Moabite women did, sin with the Israelite men. And yet, but they were not expected to be hospitable to the men, and so only the men were banned, and not the women, and so that's why David was kosher. That's why Ruth was kosher. Her conversion was accepted, right? I mean, a lot of people, they ask, oh, did the rabbinate go and investigate Ruth's conversion? And the truth is, in the time of David, yes, they went back and looked at it, and they proved it. Now the question was about the Moabite men, or the Ammonite men. And in the Talmud, it's recorded, in the Mishnah, that a convert came from one of these communities, and he asked, am I allowed to enter the congregation of the Lord? And one opinion said yes, and one opinion said no. And the answer came down that yes, they can come in. Why? Because when Sennacherib came, from Assyria, and it's the same thing the Soviets did later in history, much later in history, the 20th century, he displaced all these different nations so that they should assimilate and lose their national identity. And that's what happened to the 10 lost tribes. And that was part of his plan of conquest. And so once that happened, we don't know who the Moabites are anymore. We don't know who the Ammonites are anymore. The people who are residing in the country of the Moabites or of the Ammonites are not the original Moabites and not the original Ammonites. So therefore, we don't go and say, no, nobody, we can't accept anybody. No, we're lenient. And we say, all right, we don't know who they are. They're lost. They no longer have this identity. Now, whether or not that was proper, we're not judging. Obviously, Sennacherib was seen to be a villain. And so we're not celebrating the fact that he did this. However, once it's done, it's done. And we can now welcome anybody from any race into our religion. And even still, the fact that a Kohen, a priest, cannot marry a woman who converted, still, a few generations down, according to most opinions, you can. And that's what's the accepted halacha. And so therefore, even the high priest could be a Ben Garrison, down the line. And that's, and some of the priests in the ancient time, they already were. Pinchas, was also from Yisro's Einaklach, right? So he was called Ben Putiel, right? That Phineas was a descendant of Jethro. And so too the royal family in its roots goes to Ruth. To Root. Ruth, Riz, we call her. But, so, with all that being said, so we go back to this question. It goes both ways, I believe. And I know my friend Moshe Arya there, he says that Zamarov didn't deny the halacha that someone who's born Jewish remains Jewish. We have to understand what that means. I mean, yes and no, meaning they do not become a Gentile. But however, like Maimonides says, is kagoy l'chol davar, that Mechal Shabbos before Hesia is kagoy l'chol davar. You don't sit shiva if you have a relative who passes away, that you would sit shiva. If they're not the Shomer Shabbos, you don't sit shiva for them. If they touch wine that's not mavushal and pick it up, so then it's the wine's not kosher anymore. If they don't count for a minyan, according to the plain understanding of Shulchan Aruch. Again, there are different interpretations of what it means, and so and I believe we can be liberal to a certain extent. That if someone walks into shul, you can assume they had repented when they walked in. So for that time, there's Shomer Shabbos, and that's and they're believers. The same thing. An atheist. I had one guy. He kept saying he's an atheist, and we let him daven for the Amud once. And why? Because dvarim shebelev enim dvarim. That's the halacha. Words of the heart are not words. He was a guy. He grew up from. He was a Talmud Chacham, and he claimed to be an atheist. But if he's saying the words Baruch Atah Hashem, halachically he's not an atheist. At least at that time when he's saying the words Baruch Atah Hashem, right? You hear what I'm saying? So, and there's a tshuva from Rav Ovadia Yosef that says a person is Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Shabbos, or says Amen to that. At that time, he's called a Shomer Shabbos. He's not called a Mechal Shabbos before Hesia because he recognizes that God sanctified Shabbos. He sanctified the Sabbath, and so he's Jewish. Meaning, if he's born Jewish or if he's a ger, whatever it is. And there's even questions. I know some people have asked, can you bar on ribbis? Is it a violation of the usury laws for an apostate Jew? And there are, and most people assume you can't take ribbis from an apostate. It's not so simple. There are opinions. I know the Bajana Rav, the Das Torah, writes it's totally, there's no isser ribbis on an apostate. There's no prohibition of usury on an apostate. Is it good to be machmir? Okay. To be strict, probably. But we can work these things in different ways, but essentially when we're talking about a Soinei Hadas, someone who hates our religion like George Soros, he's an enemy of the Jewish people, he's an enemy of Judaism, he's an enemy of America, and he's an enemy of many countries. It's not anti-Semitic, and I don't like that term anti-Semitic. I've said it before. I prefer Judeophobia, meaning to claim that Jeffrey Epstein was justifying what he was doing because of a passage in the Talmud, that is Judeophobia. That is something I have a problem with. But to say that an enemy of our faith like George Soros said, to call him out as an evil person, and maybe as a puppet master, this and that, that's anti-Semitic. It could be wrong, it could be false. I'm not necessarily saying it's true, but it's not anti-Semitic. And anyway, that term Semitism, that's not the proper term, because, like I said, what's the name? Ivanka Trump, who's a pious Jewish woman, she is, she's much more Jewish than George Soros. Now, this question of in this cartoon they had the Rothschilds, the hand of the Rothschilds. Now, I don't believe that George Soros is being controlled by the Rothschilds. However, the Rothschilds, he took pages right out of their books. Not all the Rothschilds. I mean, there's a Voiler Yid, a Chassidish Yid, Rothschild, who lives in Bloomingburg. I'm not blaming him for what the non-religious Rothschilds in England might be doing. There are pious, good people who happen to have a last name Rothschild. I'm not talking about them. But this with the I can see what he's saying there, and of course this was commissioned. This wasn't his own creation. But again, like I said, and I think a lot of the conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds are exaggerated and wrong, but believing those conspiracy theories is not it's not anti-Semitic any more than believing crazy conspiracy theories about John D. Rockefeller means that you hate Northern Baptists. That's what I'm saying. And like I said, if he would have had in this cartoon something attacking the Jewish faith, attacking the Talmud, attacking the Torah, attacking religious Jews, having a picture of someone with a beard and pious or Shtreimel or something, I would call that Judeophobia. I would have a problem with that. But an atheist like George Soros and a lot of the Rothschild bankers, they're not as powerful as all the conspiracy theories are, but they are involved with the Sabbatean and Frankist, cults, these really like satanic cults. These are problems, and it's not anti-Semitic to say that. So that's why I wrote what I did to Mr. Garrison, and I don't regret it. All right.
Mr.
God bless.
Garrison.
Please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you later.